There's a small structure you can assemble on a Saturday morning without a contractor, without a crew, and without a single piece of lumber. It requires no painting. It requires no staining, no caulking, no replacing of rotted boards, no patching of shingle lines. Original versions of its design, built under wartime production conditions more than 80 years ago, are still standing and still in use. The entry-level kit ships to your door for under $550. It goes together with a socket wrench and a level. It is engineered around a geometric principle so efficient that bridges and aircraft hangars have relied on the same shape for over a century. And here's what nobody in any home improvement store will tell you. The reason it outperforms every wood alternative in its price range has nothing to do with the material and everything to do with the shape. It is called a mini Quonset. And the question worth asking is why nobody mentioned it to you sooner. Start with what the shed market actually looks like right now if you are over 65 and managing a property on a fixed income, because the numbers are not flattering, and you deserve to see them plainly. Walk into any home improvement store, and the options divide into two categories. There are the cheap wood panel kits in the $400 to $800 range, built from pressure-treated pine, that will need staining within the first year and board replacement within 5. And there are the more substantial wood frame models, the ones that look solid on the showroom floor, priced from $1,500 to $2,500 before a single nail goes in. Neither price includes assembly. A local contractor will typically charge $500 to $1,500 to put one together depending on size and complexity. And neither price tells you what the structure is going to cost you every year after the sale is complete. That is the number most people never calculate before they buy. A wood shed in a humid climate requires annual treatment to stay ahead of rot. It needs caulking around the seams, shingle inspection, and eventual replacement. It needs, in short, a person willing and physically able to get up on a ladder and do the work, or the money to pay someone who will. For a man in his late 60s or 70s managing things on his own, that ongoing demand is not a footnote. It is the whole problem with the product. The honest 5-year cost of a mid-range wood shed, when maintenance, labor, materials are included, routinely exceeds $3,000. There has been a better option on the market the entire time. And the reason you have not heard about it is worth understanding. But first, you need to know where it came from. To understand why this structure is what it is, you have to go back to a muddy field in France in 1916. A British engineer named Peter Neeson was facing a problem that had no good solution. The Allied forces needed temporary structures that a small crew could carry to the front, assemble without heavy equipment, and disassemble and move again when the line shifted. Wood framing took too long and required too many skilled hands. Canvas tents offered no real protection. Neeson looked at the problem from a different angle. He designed a semicircular shell of corrugated steel panels that bolted together over a simple base, curved from one side to the other, and required no internal framing of any kind to stand. A crew of 6 men could have one up in 4 hours. The arch itself carried the load. The men inside it were protected. The design required no expertise to assemble and no specialized tools to maintain. The United States military took notice. In 1941, at a naval construction depot in Davisville, Rhode Island, American engineers adapted Neeson's design into what became the standard Quonset hut. Over the course of the Second World War, more than 150,000 units were manufactured and shipped to every theater of the conflict, from the Pacific Islands to the coast of Normandy. 150,000 units. In 4 years, when the war ended, surplus Quonsets flooded the civilian market. Farmers used them as equipment sheds. Ranchers built entire operations around them. Rural communities across the Midwest put them up as storage facilities and community halls. Many of those original structures are still standing today, still in active daily use, decades past any reasonable expectation for a wartime temporary building. How that is possible is the part most people never get told. Picture a plain sheet of paper lying flat across 2 supports. Press down on the center, and it collapses immediately. The paper has no resistance because it has nowhere to send the force. It simply folds. Now curve that same sheet into an arch and press down again. It holds, not because the material changed, but because the geometry changed. An arch converts a downward load into outward compression along its curve, spreading force into supports at each end rather than concentrating it at the point of contact. Take a moment with that. The shape is doing the structural work, not the material. That is not a trick. That is why arches have supported stone bridges for 2,000 years, and why aircraft hangars span hundreds of feet without a single interior column. A mini Quonset is that exact principle applied to a backyard structure. The corrugated steel panels are formed into a continuous semicircle, and the arch carries the weight of wind, snow, and its own mass by distributing force along the curve and down into the base. There are no interior columns, no rafters, no ridge beams, no load-bearing walls inside. The shape is doing the work that an entire lumber frame would otherwise perform, and it is doing it without a single piece of wood. The corrugation adds a second layer to this. Run your finger across a flat sheet of steel, and it flexes with almost no resistance. Corrugate it into a series of ridges, and it becomes dramatically stiffer. The same way a corrugated cardboard box wall resists crushing far better than a flat sheet of the same material and the same weight. In the mini Quonset, arch geometry and corrugated steel work together. Manufacturer load ratings document the result as capable of handling moderate snow accumulation across most continental climates when properly anchored. The shape earns every dollar of that $550 price before a single accessory is added. That is the engineering. What the documented performance numbers show is where it stops being theory and starts being the reason this matters to your actual budget. Here is what the documented lifespan comparison actually looks like when you place galvanized steel and pressure-treated wood in the same outdoor conditions over time. A pressure-treated wood shed in a humid climate has a realistic functional lifespan of 10 to 15 years before significant structural repair becomes unavoidable. The bottom plates rot first where they contact the foundation. Then the siding joints open up and water follows them in. The roof sheathing goes next. Each failure point requires either skilled repair or accelerating deterioration. A galvanized steel arch structure, by contrast, carries a documented functional lifespan of 30 to 50 years with no maintenance beyond keeping the interior dry. The same corrosion-resistant coating that protected military Quonsets through Pacific humidity in the 1940s is the same principle at work in a backyard kit today. The material does not absorb moisture, does not support mold growth, and gives termites nothing to work with. Now, you saw the price in the title, and I want to be straight with you, because being straight with you is the whole point. The $550 figure is accurate for the base arch panel kit in the standard 8 by 12 footprint. It does not include the gravel pad foundation, which runs $50 to $150 depending on your ground, or the anchor hardware, which adds another $30 to $80. A complete, properly installed unit lands in the $630 to $780 range for most buyers. I am not going to tell you otherwise. But here is a comparison that actually matters. Under $800 complete against $1,500 to $2,500 for a comparable wood kit before assembly is added. Read that again. Under $800 complete against $2,500 for wood. That gap does not close over time. It widens because the steel asks nothing of you after installation, and the wood never stops asking. Consider the longevity case more carefully, because this is a number most buyers never look for before they commit to a purchase. Original World War II-era Quonsets in active daily use 70 and 80 years after construction are not difficult to document. These were structures built under wartime production pressure, not precision engineering conditions, assembled by crews who had never seen the design before they were handed the panels. They are still standing in climates that include the frozen winters of the upper Midwest, the salt air of coastal installations, and the summer heat of the American Southwest. The reason they are still standing is not mystifying once you understand the material. Galvanized steel does not swell, split, or develop the internal decay that eventually compromises every wood joint. It gives mold and mildew no organic material to colonize. It gives carpenter ants and termites nothing to eat. And because the arch carries the structural load through geometry rather than through a network of frame members, there are no joints to loosen, no connections to fail, no places for water to find a path inward over time. On the wind side, manufacturer engineering specifications for properly anchored mini Quonset units document resistance to sustained winds in the range of 90 to 120 miles per hour, depending on anchoring method and steel gauge. That covers a majority of severe weather events across most of the continental United States. A structure that outlived the men who built it is not a gimmick. It is an engineering argument. And yet the woodshed still fills every home improvement store aisle from one end to the other. There is a specific reason for that, and it is worth understanding before you spend $1, because it explains something that should genuinely bother you. Open up any major home improvement retailer's shed aisle and count the steel arch options. Then count the wood panel kits. The ratio is not close. Walk every aisle in the store, and you will not find a floor model, a demonstration unit, or a salesperson trained to explain how an arch carries a load. What you will find is an entire section organized around wood. And it did not get that way because someone decided to suppress the steel arch. It got that way because it arrived first. And first mover advantage in a retail supply chain is enormous and almost entirely invisible to the person standing in the aisle. The ongoing purchase stream matters here too. A woodshed generates continuous accessory spending across its lifetime. Stain, replacement boards, caulk, roof treatment, hinge hardware. A galvanized steel arch structure requires essentially none of that after installation. From a margin perspective, the product that keeps the customer returning has a structural advantage over product that asks for nothing after the initial sale. Nobody made a decision to disadvantage the steel arch. The economics of repeat purchase made that decision quietly and automatically. And then there is a familiarity problem, which is a human layer that makes all of this stick. A woodshed looks like a small barn. It reads as normal, domestic, expected. The thing your father had, the thing every neighbor has, the shape that registers as shed without a moment of hesitation. A Quonset reads as industrial to eyes that have never lived near one. The buying instinct defaults to what resembles everything else on the street, even when the thing that resembles everything else is objectively the worst purchase. That default is not a law. It is a habit, and habits, unlike laws, are something you can simply decide to examine. Nobody banned the steel arch from your backyard. The system organized itself around wood, and the momentum of that organization is nearly invisible until you look at it directly. That is how a better product loses for decades, not because it failed, because the shelf space was already taken. Here is the honest answer, and it is more useful than either the marketing version or the dismissive one. Under $550 is true. The base arch panel kit in the standard 8 by 12 footprint is available from several manufacturers at that price point. The complete installed unit, once you add a gravel pad and anchor hardware, runs $630 to $780 for most buyers. That is the accurate number. And any listing that presents $550 as the all-in cost is leaving out the part that determines whether your structure actually stays on the ground in a high wind event. Perfect for seniors is largely accurate for the right senior, a man who wants low-maintenance storage or hobby space, who is done negotiating with ladders every spring, and who wants a structure that will still be standing and functional in 20 years without a single repair call. Where it is not a perfect fit is for anyone expecting climate-controlled workspace year-round without adding interior insulation panels. Those panels run $150 to $300 depending on the model and are not optional if you plan to work inside through winter. Without them, condensation accumulates on the interior steel surface and can damage stored tools and materials over time. None of that is a deal breaker. These are plannable costs, not hidden failures. The difference between a buyer who is satisfied 2 years from now and one who is frustrated is almost always the difference between someone who accounted for the full picture before ordering and someone who did not. Friction, not failure. And friction, unlike a structural defect, is something you can plan around completely. If this is a purchase you want to make, here is where to start, and the order matters. First, measure your ground before you order anything. A flat, firm base is not optional for a steel arch structure. It is a foundation the entire load path depends on. If your ground is uneven by more than a couple of inches across the footprint, a local handyman can level a gravel pad in 2 hours. Budget $75 to $150 for that work, and treat it as part of the purchase price, not an afterthought. Second, call your local building department before you fall in love with a specific model. Most jurisdictions exempt structures under 120 square feet from permit requirements entirely, but the ones that do not will tell you exactly what they need. One 10-minute phone call eliminates the single biggest source of post-purchase frustration in this category. Third, order the steel gauge that matches your climate. In mild regions, 29 gauge panels are sufficient. In areas with meaningful snow accumulation, 26 gauge is a documented standard for load performance. The panels weigh more, but the load rating difference is real, and the cost difference between gauges is modest compared to the cost of structural failure under a heavy snow event. Fourth, add the insulation panels at the time of purchase if you plan to use the space in cold weather. Retrofitting is possible but awkward, and the manufacturer's kit pricing is always better than sourcing panels separately after the fact. Fifth, anchor to your base on day one. Wind uplift on an unanchored arch is a documented failure mode. The anchor kit costs $30 to $80 and is not where you cut costs. Sixth, read the bill of materials on any listing before you pay. Some prices include end walls and doors. Others cover arch panels only. The difference is several $100s and is not always prominently displayed. In the end, this was never a story about a steel arch. It is a story about what happens when the right tool gets organized out of the conversation by the tools that came first, and about what becomes available to you the moment you decide to look past the default. Normal is a choice. And a $750 structure that you will never paint, never treat, and never replace is a fairly good argument for making a different one. If cutting real costs without sacrificing durability is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribing is the simplest way to make sure the next one of these reaches you instead of getting buried.